Hey all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani.
And I'm Sam.
All right, let's get started with an inmate-driven story today.
Ah, this is a new one for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I told you it was coming. It just took a while to get them together.
I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. All right. Oftentimes, when a crime is committed, people are left with more questions than answers. If a person takes a plea or refuses to testify, the victims' families can be left with a hollow void, one that aches to know what would go through a person's mind to justify ending someone's life. But if they learn the answer, will it help them heal or open new wounds? Would they even believe the words of a killer?
That's a great intro right there. Good job.
Yeah, so this is the case of Harley Edward Boitz, who was born on May in 1994 in Sunland, Tahunga, California, growing up with a single mother. When in California, he lived outside of LA in the country where his grandfather raised horses to show on a ranch. And he says some of his favorite memories are of jumping bareback on a horse and riding off into the canyon to spend the day.
Oh,
I know, very wholesome to start.
yeah, that's a pretty incredible family too. Like a horse ranch, I feel like is a unique thing for people to have in their childhood.
Yeah. Well, at age 10, he moved to Grants Pass, Oregon. And when I asked him why they moved, he said his mom had to get away from his own demons, or her own demons, excuse me. So
Oh.
I don't know exactly how the childhood was. That's
Hmm.
just kind of how he broaches subjects. Very direct, very short.
Okay.
Um, there he met Paul Folk, and the two became fast friends.
That's funny. Yeah, he was like I think it was like the second day I moved up here. I met him at school.
Yeah. And you became
And then
fast
we
friends
just
ever
became
since?
hella good friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I assume you guys were into the same stuff?
Yeah, we did the same shit together, hung out with the same people together, dated the same girlfriends. Like, we did everything together. That was my boy.
How did you know Daniel?
Kind of the similar situation. He moved up a couple of years later, but me, him, and Paul, and like another handful of people, we all grew up together.
All right, so the audio played was just about how he grew up with Paul and Daniel. And again, he said that they started doing everything together. And a couple years later, Daniel Hill moved into town, and the duo became the trio of good friends.
It's interesting, like hearing his voice, he sounds like exactly like a friend of mine from college. So it's sort of eerie, like
Yeah.
listening to it. Yeah, like his like cadence and his tone.
hmm
It just makes it, he is a human, I was gonna say, but a bit makes it more human. Like
Yeah. hmm
it's really interesting.
Harley stated that he started smoking weed at 10 years old. At 13, he added mushrooms, acid, and peyote.
Oh, yikes.
And by 15, had tried meth.
Oh, I can't even imagine a 13-year-old Sam like tripping on mushrooms or acid. Oh,
Yeah.
it'd be a nightmare.
Yeah. Or meth by 15.
I mean,
Like
meth
that's,
is something I just can't comprehend at all,
yeah.
really. Like, it just feels so dirty to me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Harley went to North Valley High School, made it to 10th grade, and got expelled again due to the drugs. An interesting point he said is he picked up a tattoo gun around 15 after an older artist told him he'd be good at it based on his drawing skills. And he is covered pretty much head to toe with tattoos now.
Oh,
That was one of our first conversations, was talking about tattoos. He's got like a bear on the top of his head, and
oh,
it just
wow.
everything all the way down. Like his beard, quote unquote, says indigenous. Like he's
Wow.
tattooed like from head to toe, essentially, already.
Does he give himself tattoos ever? I know some people like practiced on themselves and
Yeah, I think some of them are his own doing, but
not
the face,
depicting his head.
the face is not
That would be
his
an
own doing. He
incredible
has his
skill.
one. Yeah. Um,
I'm interested, like, he gets kicked out of school for drugs. I'm
mhm.
just curious, like, was he selling drugs? Do you know what? Or was it just like he was just a bad boy because he had drugs and
I don't know if he was selling at this time, but he does say throughout his lifetime he sells meth intermittently to pay the bills. He says, he's only ever had one job in his whole life, where he laid concrete, and it was for maybe a few months before he
Mhm.
was in and out, because he's been in and out of the system since juvie, which we're going to talk
Yeah.
about.
Laying
Um,
concrete is like a very mobster job, I
I
feel like.
know, I know. It's very hard labor. So to go from not working at all to all of a sudden like laying concrete,
Yeah.
that's hard work.
Yeah, it is.
His first juvenile sentence occurred when he shot a kid in the shoulder for trying to kiss him, according to
Oh.
Harley. That day, he was out in the yard shooting a gun when a boy tried to quote unquote plant one on me. So Harley pushed him off and told him to leave. The kid did not leave, but went and sat on Harley's porch. Harley, seeing that, turned and told the kid to get, and when he didn't, he brought up his gun. Thinking it was on safety, he aimed and squeezed, and he ended up shooting the kid on the inside of the shoulder, so
Oh
between the
my
neck and the
God.
shoulder.
Yeah. When I first moved up here, this dude, this kid, he was 14. I was like 11 or 12, and we became friends and shit. But one day, I was out shooting my gun. He came over and he tried to plant a kiss on me, and I was fucking not having that. You know what I mean? And I told him to bounce, and he didn't. He went and sat on my fucking. He went and sat on my front porch, and I turned around, and I thought my gun was on safety, but it wasn't. And I pulled the trigger, and I shot that motherfucker.
He was 15, you said?
I think it was around that age, yeah. And he
Wow.
said that the boy screamed and ran off. I'll play you the audio later. I don't know if I'll play it on here because it's just ridiculous. Where he basically mocks the kid, and I was like, "Oh, you are still a child, Harley. You're still a
Oh my
child."
God. Yeah.
Uh, After that, he was in and out of the system. He said after that first sentence, he never got off probation.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's just that just is it,
Yeah.
right? Like you're at that age that you can turn your gun on someone and pull the trigger, whether you think the safety's on or not,
Yeah.
is like that's
I can't fathom bringing up a gun to like a friend or somebody I know and just pointing at him like, "Get out of here," or and when they
never.
don't, he's like, "Okay," and feigns to shoot him, but then actually shoots him, and it's so close to the neck. Like,
Oh yeah.
so
I mean, he got incredibly lucky that he didn't get locked away for life right then,
yeah.
right? Like
hmm
it,
At 17, he got his first adult sentenced. He was sentenced after getting caught stealing cars and committing B&Es, or a B&E where he took guns from a home. When asked why he stole cars, he stated he liked to drive and his mother wouldn't let him take her car, so he simply began starting to take others and using them to ride around.
oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
because I always, the first thing when he's like, "Oh yeah, I started stealing cars," my thought was like, "Okay, are you sending him to chop shops? Like,
Right.
what are you doing with them?" He literally stole them because he
He's
wanted
just
to drive.
joyriding.
Yeah, and he never got a license, never got anything. He would just take the car and go until it wouldn't go anymore.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Um, but he did commit the B&E, which was funny because I asked him about it and I was like, "Hey, can you talk to me about this B&E?" And he's like, "What B&E?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness, we had a whole conversation about this." I was like, "The robbery that sent you from juvie to adult prison." He's like, "Oh yeah, I broke into somebody's house." And I was like, "That's breaking and entering, Harley.
Right.
That's a B&E." It didn't compute to him. He's like, "Oh well, I just broke into his house." I'm like, "Okay, okay.
Uh,
You took his guns, dude." Like,
I mean, that's a pretty severe offense.
hmm
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Uh,
I mean, the stealing cars and just joyriding them around is just to me it's
Brazen.
so dumb.
It's also brazen because the moment reports their car stolen, the cops are then
Right.
looking out for it,
For
and you're
that
just
car.
riding around in a stolen
Yeah.
car. This is why he got caught.
I mean, again, I write young boys off in so many of like examples of just young,
Yeah,
stupid
yeah.
thinking. It's like, oh, well, their brain isn't.
It's immature thinking. Yeah,
Boy brains suck.
yeah, definitely. Um, so for this crime, he spent 3 years in prison, being released at 20 years old. Then, a few months later, he stole another car and was sentenced to another 2 years and was released in 2015. This time, when he was released, he met a woman who would later become the mother of his daughter, who he does say is pretty much like the light of his life right now.
Mhm.
He was out for 6.5 months and went right back to stealing cars.
Stealing cars.
Stealing cars.
So it's about the thrill of it all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's a pattern.
Yeah.
He's, and don't forget at this time, he's also, drinking, doing drugs, selling some drugs, and just taking cars and doing kind of whatever he wants.
Right.
The selling the drugs, he said, would be to pay kind of the bills, but it was never anything like a major operation. But yeah.
It feels like you should steal a car, joyride it around, and then bring it to a chop shop. Then you don't have to sell the meth on the side. You now are getting a little...
Stop trying to do inner workings of the system.
I know.
Don't do that. Don't do it. But then there's also more people involved, and he was never really like, now that he's in big boy prison, he is affiliated. But I don't think before that did he really, on the outside, was he really into like
know the people?
It wasn't a gang life. It wasn't anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So for that, then the last car that he stole, he was sentenced for 70 months and released in 2021.
It's interesting. I feel like I guess 70 months. I'm like, what is that in math? It's 5.
It's a while.
Like 4.
Don't make me math.
Like 4.5 years or so. Yeah. I was going to say, it feels like his sentences get less and less each time he steals a car, but that's
years and months, I guess.
Yeah.
This time he was released prior to Vine acknowledging that he was no longer in prison, as he was originally slotted to be released 6 months later. So Vine is an online notification system. So if you're a victim of a person or anything like that, it'll notify you that somebody's getting out. But it also updates when prisoners are released, and then they don't show up in the system anymore.
Interesting.
So I guess according to him, and again, this is all according to him, because if you look him up, all you see is what happened.
Right.
That lands him in for a long time, not any of the like preceding events. So this is all according to him, that he was released 6 months early. And according to him, he headed straight to the mother of his daughter's house, who was in a relationship with his best friend, again, Paul. Paul, however, had gone to county, or he did go to county, excuse me, the next day, serving 60 days, and was not present in the home for the next 60 days.
Was Paul with the mother of his daughter after she was already the mother of his daughter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And he seemed to not really care about that. And when you talk to Harley about how they grew up, that's kind of how they grew up. Like he said, we dated the same girlfriends. We did everything together. So he didn't really seemed very like, he was like, whatever.
Right. Not the jealous type.
Yeah. It was just like, that's my baby mama. I'm done with her on that end, but that's still my child. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Over the next few weeks, he did become suspicious of Paul, however. First, his 4-year-old asked to show him a new dance that Paul taught her and began twerking. Harley told her that wasn't okay for little girls to do, citing his ideals formed from his numerous prison stints. And I'll play the audio for that for everybody in a minute. But he talks about like, hey, if you were in prison, you wouldn't think like that's okay. And the fact that Paul taught him, but Paul's also been in prison. He was like, oh, that's weird.
That's weird.
Like, why would you teach? And his daughter at this time's like 4, I think. Yeah, 4. Yeah. I said that.
I think prison or not prison, it'd be weird. I would have, like, if I was grabbing my daughter from, like, stepmom or whatever, and she's learning how to twerk, I'd be like, really? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I think it's different environments, though, because there's, how many hundreds of videos of little kids twerking and dancing and doing all sorts of things that you'd be like,
Yeah. If she did it, which she does do it on her own all the time, and I'll, like, be like, like but if someone's teaching her that, it just feels different to me.
Yeah. And then about a week later, his daughter was sitting on his thigh while they were together, and she asked him if she should sit in the center of his lap. Harley told her no and asked why, and to this, his daughter purportedly stated that's where Paul liked her to sit. And that's kind of where Harley saw red. And so in Harley's mind, his daughter was being groomed. And when Paul was released from jail, he worked at tracking him down.
So I got out, and the day that I got out, no one knew I was getting out because on that red vines or red links or whatever, it said that I'd get out like 6 months later. And so no one got out. It was like a surprise. So I went straight to my baby mom's house. And we'd already been broke up for a long time. And so I didn't care that she was with my best friend. But when I got out and I showed up, he went to juvenile. He went to county the next day. So I didn't like get to confront him about being with my baby mama or anything like that. And so me and my daughter are hanging out a couple weeks later. And at the time she's 4 years old. And she goes, "Daddy, do you want me to show you a new dance that Paul taught me?" I was like, "Yeah, sure," because she's dancing. And I was like, "Yeah, sure, teach me." And she started twerking. And I'm like, "Yo, whoa, what are you doing, baby?" And she's like, "What? Paul taught me this dance." And I was like, "Well, that's a grown girl's dance. You don't do that until you're married." And she didn't understand. I mean, so I had to explain it to her a little bit. And I look at my baby mama, and she's like, "What? That's cute." And I was like, I guess it could be cute for someone that's never been to prison, and it could see how that's weird to teach your best friend's daughter to twerk. You know what I mean? That's kind of weird. And so it's a couple weeks after this, and I told you, Paul, he went to county jail. He got 60 days. And it's a couple weeks after the dancing incident, and she's sitting on my lap on my right thigh, and we're about to pass out. We're on the couch, and she goes, "Daddy." And I was like, "What's up?" She's like, "Do you want me to sit in the middle of your lap?" And I was like, "No, why?" And she's like, "Well, that's where Paul likes me to sit when we're watching movies." And I was like, "Oh man!" In my head, it just clicked. Like, this fool is slowly grooming her into like having sexual things be done to her or to him, and it's being okay. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't think that was right. Like, no, you don't sit in the middle of boys' laps. You can sit on my lap, on my thigh, or whatever. But it just made it weird. And I'm like, "No, baby girl, I'm sorry, you can't do that shit." And I just seen what it truly was, and that fool was slowly grooming her into something worse. So when that fool got out, it was, I had to track him down. It took me a week to track him down, but I finally found him, and I got his ass.
That was it. He found him a week later on March 24th, 2021, when he was out with Daniel Hill. They caught up with him when Paul was in his van, and Harley said that they wanted to talk. And so Daniel got into Paul's van to make sure Paul didn't leave and drove and put Paul in like the passenger seat. And they went into the woods, and Harley followed them.
Oh. Such a... Was Daniel in on this?
No, Daniel originally asked for a ride. That's the only reason he was there when Harley was out. And he was like, "Yeah, sure, I can give you a ride, but I need to see if I can find Paul really quick," because he thought he knew where he was. He's like, "If I find him, like, I need to talk to him." Like, and I guess the tone of voice was enough that Daniel was like, "All right." I was like, man, I don't know if I'd just be like, "Cool, let me jump in this vehicle and help you take him to the woods."
I know the woods part is like, there would be a lot of
ominous.
red flags in my head. If my friends were like, "Hey, I need to talk to this person," and probably said it not in like a nice, friendly tone. And then said, "Yeah, we're going to take him to the place where people dump bodies or whatever." I'd be like, "Wait, hold on.
It wasn't very far in the woods.
It's still just so strange.
And I mean, if they were best friends for life, maybe he was like, "Oh, I'm going to, we're going to have a conversation," or he doesn't want to do it in public. Or because they're all convicted felons, they've all done time. I don't think that they wanted to put it in the streets so that if it came to a fight, then the police are called, maybe is where they were coming from. Harley doesn't really explain why. He was also, to be noted, high as a kite this whole time. So
right. I was going to say, probably actually wasn't out of their norm. Like to go out to the woods. Right. Drink or whatever it was they were doing. But
and so when they got out, Paul had his phone in his hand, and Harley states that he told him to give it to him. Paul said no, and Harley pulled out his gun, a 9mm, which he says that he carries at all times, and repeated to him to give him the phone or he'd shoot him. Like, he very blunt. When Paul refuses to comply, Harley raised his gun and fired a single shot, which hit him in the face and blew out the back of his skull.
And then when we got out of the truck, that fool had his phone in his hand, and I didn't know what he was doing, and I said, give me your phone. He said, no. I pulled out my gun, and I was like, if you don't give me your phone, I'm going to shoot you in the fucking face. And he said no, and I just, blam, shot him in the face.
Wow.
No warning, no nothing. Not even like a shot to the shoulder, like straight to the face.
He was mad.
Yeah, I mean, he saw red.
He was mad.
And he was mad for 2 weeks. I can't imagine stewing on that.
Oh.
Yeah.
He didn't want to give his phone up.
Yeah, and he didn't know what he was doing, like if he was recording him or if he was going to call somebody, which is why Harley said he wanted him to give him up the phone. He's like, I didn't want, this to be recorded, or I didn't want.
Oh, see, I thought he wanted the phone to like go through it and see if there's any like weird evidence or anything like that.
He just said that he didn't trust that he wasn't going to record or call the police. So Paul hit the ground. And I asked why he never talked to him about the situation, and Harley states he didn't believe this was Paul's first time. If Paul knew he needed to groom a child before doing anything, and if he simply beat him down, that would give Paul a chance to have future victims.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the like gap to jump, though, right? Like
it is,
because there's so many things that like my brain goes through. Like maybe Paul grew up in an environment that like that's just the way interactions were with his family. It wasn't that he was getting abused or anything, but it was like, you sit here or whatever it is. Or maybe it was
sitting in the middle of the lap is weird.
I know it's weird. No,
I can't.
It's weird.
I can't. I'm like,
no, it's really weird. And I think that Harley has like every right, and his gut instinct is probably right, I would imagine, or close to right. But I don't know. There's a lot of like to get from A to Z where he ended up is
he
like
just jumped. He jumped.
There was a lot of letters in between that you could have like addressed.
And I did. I asked him. I was like, "Why didn't you talk to him?" And he's like, "No, didn't need to." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Maybe like he had a good explanation. Like maybe he was, I don't know. You know what I mean? There's 1,000 different things that could have happened and again, this is coming from a 4-year-old. So maybe like he was actually moving the child away from the center of his lap or, maybe, and I'm like, oh, because yes, 4-year-olds can tell the truth, but they can also make very big stories. My kids used to make up stories all the time that were so fantastical, but dead face, believable.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
Literally every time that like my daughter was playing with her dad, and then all of a sudden she like doesn't want to play anymore. Since she doesn't have her words, she just starts crying. And so I'll come into the room and I'll be like, "What's wrong?" And she goes, "Dada hit me." Didn't you? Like I literally was right there the whole time. Like, you're ridiculous. Like, it's just so. It seems like
it's very dangerous to do everything based on the words of a 4-year-old.
It is. Yeah.
And, like no concrete proof or evidence. And I'm not saying it did happen, not saying it didn't happen because we don't know.
I know.
Like,
I wish Harley would have grabbed his phone and like had like legit evidence on there or something like that.
Something. All right, so I'm going to play the audio that he says about it.
I just judged the book. I didn't have to judge any book. Like, my daughter told me what it was, and that's what it was. I mean, I feel like if I would have just beat him up or something like that, I mean, like he would have continued to do it with whoever. If he would have left town, then the next little girl would have been in jeopardy.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously that wasn't his first victim, because no one, as a first-time sex offender, just starts grooming a child into accepting these things as all right before you whip it out or whatever. I don't know. Fucking.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what he says about that.
I mean, he like, it's so matter of fact. Like, oh, but he's gone.
Everything that he says is very matter of fact. Like pulling information out of him, I'm like, okay, but like he'll tell you everything about what he did, and I'm like, but why though? And then he's like, oh, well, I guess because of this. Like, I think the drugs definitely slowed down what his rationale was, but in the end, he did it, and he still comes to terms with the fact that he did it.
It seems like exactly what we're talking about, like how he just jumped from A to Z. Like I said, like he doesn't really have the middle letters, right? Like, so when you ask him why, he doesn't know because he never really thought about it, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Like, it just was like, oh, well, I just did it.
Which
Like,
feels a lot like an inmate mentality, honestly. Like this is what happened, so this is what's going to happen. And there's no reasoning in between.
right.
It's just that's what happens if you do it, right? And he's grown up in the system long enough that if you do something, this is the consequence. And there's no thought process in between, or there's no potential variables. It's just
Right.
this is what it is. And that's what it felt like to me as he's been indoctrinated into this system. So then he hears this and, chomos aren't well received in prison. And so he's like, oh, you're one of them. Like that is against my code. Now we're going to deal with it. And that's it.
Yeah.
Whether or not there's, variables in there, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them.
Right. It's
It's
yeah.
It's A to Z, and there isn't, the alphabet doesn't exist.
Right. You're not trying to psychoanalyze the reasons why people did something and like give them benefits of a doubt and like, no, that's not happening. It's like, nope, these are the hard rules and you didn't follow them.
Yeah.
So you're out.
And that's just how he talks. Like this is what he did and this is what happens. I was like, oh, okay. Okay. And he says of the event, while Daniel originally freaked out, Harley told him to basically grab Paul's legs, and together Daniel and Harley placed Paul in the back of Harley's truck. Paul's vehicle wouldn't move. It was having mechanical issues, and so it was left behind. From there, they drove to a local grow site and stole cans, gas cans, of course. And this is from Harley directly.
We had to go get gas and shit, so we went and hit a lick on some gas. Because there's hella fools down there in Grants Pass and Cave Junction area that are growing weed, all these Mexicans and shit. And so we went and hit a lick on their grow site and got a whole bunch of 5-gallon gas tanks full of gas.
So after they got the gas cans, they contacted a man named Asa, or Michael Mooring, telling him that that Harley had something he needed to get rid of. Asa and Harley had met during a previous prison set, and when he was released, Asa allowed Harley to live at his house. So they were friends as well. And this is what he says about Asa.
Because that was like my pretty close homie. Like, not really, I couldn't say close as like me and Paul and shit, but I met him when I got out of prison this last time in 2021, and me and him clicked hella tough. And I started living it at his house. And so when that shit happened, I was eventually going to go to his house anyways because that's where I live. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I contacted him and was like, yo, fool, I need some help. And he's like, what's up? And I was like, I need to get rid of something, dog. I'm in a situation. He's like, all right, say no more. I'll meet you.
So Asa drove his vehicle to Harley, and then the trio were once again on the move. Asa led...
Can I just say real fast?
Yeah.
What a good friend. Asa? Yeah, I mean...
You say that now and just wait.
Oh, I know. I know that he's like... It's a different type of friend, but like the ability to just call a friend and be like, hey, I've got something I need to get rid of. And they just are like, I'll be right there.
Yeah.
Like, I love that. Like,
I do not.
I know it's.
If I roll up and I see a body, I'd be like, that is not what I thought you were going to say. Like, maybe we were taking a couch to the dump.
I know. I know. I would be shocked too if I walked in and I saw that. My friendship now would probably not be very good with the person who gave me that call. But it's pretty, like, it seems like he just knew.
Yeah.
Like this guy just, yeah. He was like, okay.
Again, they met in prison.
In prison, right.
But also, I feel like after you hear the story, you learn that you have to, because you know how you're always like, oh, if somebody ever was like, oh, I have a body, you'd freak out. And as you'll learn in this story, that is not the thing to do. I'm like, oh, so we're going to pretend that we're best friends and do this and then maybe do something else?
Right.
This is not the one you go against.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is pretty crazy because I always thought before, like, if I'm ever in this and somebody's like, oh, I have some, and I don't think I know anybody that would be that crazy.
Right.
But if anybody ever came and they had a body, I think I would have freaked out and like, cool, I'm going to call the cops now. And now I'm like, I don't think I would right away. I think I'd have to play that through.
Yeah. Okay. I think I know what you're getting at. And I have never thought about that before.
We'll get to it. We're going to get to it.
That is a life lesson if I've ever heard one.
Mm-hmm. So again, Asa drove his vehicle to Harley's, and Asa led the way, and Harley and Daniel followed in Harley's truck in the woods, which again is another stolen vehicle. I should just preface that. It's not his actual vehicle. He's never owned one.
I assume that
It's
the
just the one
first
he's been
time around.
driving.
Yeah.
When they got out to the location, Daniel started freaking out and was talking to himself, saying that he was going to kill Harley, that he needed to kill him before Harley could basically kill Daniel. Harley and him had been bickering the whole time that they drove out there, and Harley had enough and picked up his pistol and shot Daniel.
That's when Daniel started acting crazy and talking about he's going to shoot me, and I just pulled out my gun and shot that fool. Fucking got the gas tank, started pouring gas everywhere, and I kind of was already in a bad mood because the whole time Daniel's tripping, like talking under his breath, and I had my little dog with me, and he kept like letting my dog get in my lap, and I'm trying to navigate this crazy ass fucking 4-lane road, and like my dog gets in my lap, and I try to throw it off, and we drive off the side of a cliff that's on him, and I kept telling him that, I was like, just hold my dog, bro, please, and he kept letting it get in my lap, and so I'm pissed, and so I kind of lost it for a second, and that's when I scalped both those fools, and fucking, once I scalped them, I fucking lit them on fire and jumped in the truck with Asa, and Asa's like, where's that other fool at? I was like, fuck that fool, he's barbecuing, dog, let's go.
Wow. Like,
so yeah, that's where he's at on that is, I mean, first of all, they're all on drugs, so I don't know if I'd be whispering to myself too, but probably the fact that he just witnessed his friend kill his other best friend probably would throw my psyche off as well, you know? And so for him to just be like, oh, well, he was going to kill me. So originally I was going to let him go, but he started saying stuff. So I ended him. Like, what?
oh,
that is so callous feeling.
It is. Like, just the, I'm the one with the gun. Like, it's just,
it's just how he thought. Like,
it was like not thinking.
Yeah.
It was just the very first, like, little glimpse of thought that comes into his head. He acts on, sort of like, I'm not even gonna like try to ration with, like, just talk to this guy and have him calm down at all.
So he said because he had to shoot Daniel, he was pissed, right? He's even more mad because he had to kill another friend that originally he wasn't going to. So because he's so mad at the situation, Harley stated that he scalped both men before setting them on fire.
Oh.
Yeah. And originally when we talked, and this is how you know that there's a little bit of like showboating, or the facts don't always quite add up, and so it's kind of hard to tell truth from what either he remembers or what he's just saying to say. Because originally when we talked about like, why did you light the fucking vehicle on fire? Like, why? What was the purpose of that?
Right.
Like, you didn't do it enough to conceal the bodies or anything like that. It's in the woods. Like, they were found. Dental records prove who they were. And originally he said that, well, he already had fuel in the vehicle, and he had scalped them, and he didn't want anybody to know that he had scalped them. So then he burnt them to hide that. But then when we talk about it later, he talks about how they had to drive to a grow site to get said fuel cans.
Right.
And so it's like, well, where are you at then? Like, what part of that is the truth?
Right.
But he does say multiple times that he did scalp the men. And when I asked why, again, this is just one of the another weird quirks, and he's just like, well, I'm indigenous, and I thought, who's done this in so many years? He's like, so I'm going to do it. That was the only reason. There was no purpose to it.
Oh, man. That's like, puts him now in a new, like, mental category for me a little bit. Like, it goes from being like sort of vigilante, like, I'm protecting my daughter from this man who's a predator and the future girls out there that could get, and then it like, I don't know, just sort of goes just that little bit further.
Where you're like, well, now that sounds very made up. Like, that sounds like the excuse that you needed, or your reasoning why to not seem like you're as bad as you are. You know?
Right. Because again, maybe I could not understand, but I could hear the reasoning for doing that to Paul. Because you're, that's you're getting vengeance. And that's the way you were so angry at him. That's what you felt needed to happen. But then Daniel, who the only reason you're killing him is because he's freaking out.
And all he did was ask for a ride in the morning and then help drive a truck because you're like, I have to find him first. And he's like, well, all right, I'm already in the vehicle.
Yeah, like that to me, that's when it's like, okay, you're not totally right. Like, I mean, obviously going into this, we knew that.
Yeah.
Considering he's just stole cars and
Yeah.
just like prison for that, like you're not thinking clearly at that point.
From there, he went to Asa's. So after setting the truck on fire, he went to Asa's vehicle and Asa asked where Daniel was. And Harley stated, he's burning too. And I'll insert the audio for everybody to listen to, but he just matter of fact about it. And then the two take off. And again, I told you I asked why he burned his own truck, and he stated it was stolen anyway. They then went to Paul's broken down vehicle and lit that one on fire and then went home. Which again, why? You can identify it. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
But
if anything, that to me seems like you're just making it easier for them to like find out what's going on. Like you just basically connected dots between bodies and cars burning.
And they kind of did. And because they set off this big fire in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night. So it's, at 12:50 p.m., first responders got a call about a fire about 7 miles south of Lake Salmac in Selma, Oregon. There, they found a vehicle burning with 2 bodies inside. So they knew immediately.
Right.
Like it wasn't even like you hid anything.
Right.
Investigators from Josephine County Major Crime Team, which consists of Oregon State Police, Grants Pass Department of Public Safety, Josephine County District Attorney's Office, and Josephine County Sheriff's Office came together to work the homicide.
How quickly did they get him?
Weeks.
Yeah.
So weeks later, Asa and Harley started the day by picking up Asa's dog that had been shot by police, according to Harley. He said Asa was too emotional to go inside and get the dog from a vet's office, I think. So Harley went in, where he stated there was a cop actually standing by the door. And when he asked why he was there, Harley stated that he had to get the dog for Asa, but felt like the cop was watching him the whole time. And again, if you remember the timeline 2021, we're still masked up.
Right.
So he said he had mask on, hoodie over his, head and stuff. And I was like, well, you're pretty
and a
conspicuous.
Bear tattooed on his forehead.
Yeah, but it's up towards the hairline. Okay. So if he had
his
the hood on, I don't think you would have seen it.
Right.
Because when I talked to him, he had to turn his whole head down to see it.
Yeah.
But he does have tattoos that go across the face under the eyes, and it's a straight line and then dots under that. Which you would probably still be able to see even with the mask. He wouldn't have been able to see like his indigenous tattoo, and he said, I can't remember what his mustache says. It says something.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't have been able to see all that. But I mean, he's going to pick up a dog that was shot by police. There's usually a reason it was shot. So
right.
I'm sure they were watching him. Like, who is this fool?
Yeah. And they probably always were watching him.
Yeah, probably.
Like,
I'm sure
long before those cars burned in that forest, they were watching him.
Well, maybe not until it burned, but there's 2 known associates of his that just died.
Right.
And
but I feel like in general, and maybe this is like the ideal world of policing where they've got the budget. Theory? Well, no, just like when there's someone who's like a repeat offender and they move into a new zip code, a lot of time I feel like a lot of times there's sometimes little like
no, then they would have pulled him over for the stolen truck that he had.
I guess that's true. They weren't watching him that close. No. You're right.
So the 2 brought the dog home and buried it, and Asa asked if Harley wanted to go out again. Originally, he said no, but decided he might as well go. He says a few different stories. Again, this is Harley telling stories. So one was that Asa needed to drop off his girlfriend, and then they were going to ride around. And then the other was that they were getting an oil filter for Harley's Harley. When a cop pulled up behind them, the 2 attempted to pull into Asa's uncle's property, believing they couldn't get stopped on private property. However, the gates were shut, and so when they pulled in, they were basically boxed in by the cop who turned on his lights. When he got to the door, he called for backup, and the two were arrested. When he asked if he knew an arrest was, or when I asked if he knew that an arrest was coming, he said that he had this tingling, nagging feeling that something was going to happen, which was why originally he didn't want to go out. In addition to that, he forgot his gun, which he takes everywhere.
Thank God.
So, of course, when he says that, I'm like, okay, well, what would have been different if you had your gun on you? Because that's a very big statement to just say nonchalantly. And again, he's one that you have to like pull information out of it. He's not giving it. He's just like, oh, yeah, but I didn't have my gun on me. So the cop was like, put your hands up. And he's like, all right, like very nonchalant about it. And I was like, so I asked what would have been different. And he said that, yes, it would have been different if he had been carrying that day. He said he didn't say that he would go on a crazy spree. What he did say is he would have taken Asa hostage and attempted to flee.
Yeah. Most definitely. Because I could have took Asa hostage. And I could have, you know what I mean? Like, it could have been a whole different thing. Yeah.
Somehow. Asa hostage, huh? Okay.
Yeah, I would have took him hostage and the cops would have backed off. I mean, I would have been able to fucking bam through the fence. I would have jumped in the driver's seat of his truck and mobbed off. Kick him out the door. But I didn't have my gun, and they had a whole bunch, and
Instead, he was immediately arrested without incident, and Harley states that Asa rolled immediately, and as a result, Harley took a deal avoiding trial.
Oh.
And Asa did. He's out on the streets now. So he was sentenced in October 2022 for 2 counts of murder 1, 2 counts of abuse of a corpse, and 1 count unauthorized use of a vehicle. At the time he was sentenced, he overheard families' remarks about how Paul and Daniel were good men, and Harley states that he chose to remain silent. In the end, he received 45 to life. At the time they were killed, Paul Folk was 26 and Daniel Hill was 24. I asked if he ever said anything to the family. He said no. And this is what he said.
Did you ever tell them why you did it?
No. I didn't want to ruin their son's image. You know, even though he was a dirtbag and did that weird shit to my daughter, I don't want to ruin their son's image of him being a good child. I mean, he's never been arrested for any sex crimes, so it's not like they knew what he was doing. And so I figured, I mean, why not? Why add insult to injury when their son's already dead? Why fucking be like, oh yeah, he's a fucking sex offender too?
He also states that he has no remorse for the killings, that he was simply a garbage man that took out the trash. And so I have to play that part too.
A killer. I feel like just a garbage take powder. I mean, a garbage dude. All I did was take out some garbage. I cleaned the surface of this earth of a fucking sex offender and some crazy lame.
So yeah, he says a lot about being a garbage man.
It's so just surface.
I know. But he does say he has no remorse, and he said it multiple times when I talked to him.
I'm like, there's part of me that wants to think that the reason it's surface is because he doesn't want to think about it. Like, he doesn't want to actually put himself, like, tap into the emotions of what he did.
Yeah.
And then there's the other part of me that's like, no, he's just got no emotions towards it. He just doesn't.
He really didn't seem to. So doing these interviews, I did phone and a video one. And even on the video, it's very like cut and dry or joking. There was never any like twinge of emotion for either Paul or Daniel. And he grew up with them since 10. So he was with them for 16 years.
Yeah. Like they were like his people.
Yeah.
Probably closer to him, I would argue, without knowing much of his past than his family was.
Yeah.
Like, you do everything with the kids you grow up with. Mm-hmm. They know you on a, like, intrinsic level, I feel like, compared to any other human you meet at any other point of your life. Yeah. And he just offed them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so the last couple questions I had for Harley were about prison, because of course, I think lay people have a very different view on what prison is,
100%.
and I find it very entertaining, of course, because I've seen the inside for work. And so he says originally he got bounced around in the different prisons throughout the state, and he landed at the state penitentiary, and he says that he loves it there. They get a lot of yard time, and he has a lot of programs that he gets to take part in and stay out of trouble. And they have, he's indigenous, and so he's part of that crew.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that. I will say that. He's affiliated with them.
Uh-huh.
And they have a like powwow and sweat lodge every year, and so he still gets to take part in those events.
That's amazing.
That's spoiled.
That's
spoiled.
amazing.
He hasn't yet, though, because he's still considered a level 1, which means he is either a fighter or he's still peeing hot on UAs and going to seg. Because level 1's the lowest, which means he's still getting into trouble and he can't clear to the next level. And so he can't take part in those until you're a higher level, because you have to prove that you're not going to just get into a fight or do
Right.
something crazy at these big events that they bring in people for.
You have to have good behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was actually what slowed down talking to him, is there were several times that he couldn't make it to the yard to make a phone call because he had to, quote unquote, deal with other things. And so we leave it at that, you know. But he is actually, I don't know, like I said, he's such a weird, I have this feeling that if he wasn't on drugs and he hadn't been in the juvie system, like he could have probably been a decent human being, because he's got, like, he's not dumb. He's got an understanding of things now. Again, no remorse for the situation and what he did, but other things, like, I was like, oh, that's kind of shitty that you went in so young and ruined your whole life, because 45 to life, you're getting out. He's going to be
I was trying to
70.
do that math in my head.
He'll be 71, I think. Maybe a little bit older by the time he was sentenced.
Cars will be a lot different to steal then, too.
Yeah. But I'm like, that was your whole life. And, you know,
Yeah.
like I said, he has a daughter and he loves his daughter and they get to video visit and stuff. But I'm like, oh my goodness.
I was thinking about this too. How did he get the charge of like abuse of a corpse, or what
For
was?
lighting it on fire.
Oh, for the fire. Okay. I
Mhm.
wasn't sure if they heard about the
Nobody,
scalping or
I have
anything.
never read a news article that said that they were scalped. I've never seen, I couldn't find anywhere that there was anything about them being scalped. So I think if he did actually do it, which he claims to have several times when we've talked, like that was one of his big points, is that he did that. Then it was concealed under the fire, which I mean would be pretty easy to do if you're dumping the fuel over them, you know what I mean?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And then lighting it on fire, because that's the most
And it
surface
was
elements of
in the
people.
forest. I mean, I'm sure there was a road to get down to where they were at, but like still, by the time someone sees smoke and then reports it and the fire station figures out where it's at, like, yeah, they would have been
Oh yeah,
melted.
I do believe that they needed dental records
Yeah,
to identify
I
them.
believe
So
for sure.
yeah. So that is the case of Harley Boitz.
That was fascinating.
Yeah.
The audio ads, like the fact that you've talked to this guy and like listening to him, he really does, he sounds like identical to like one of my very good friends from college.
Yeah.
And even in the way he thinks too. Like this guy plays college football and he's like a different, like he's used his lineal thinking to serve him in life and what he does, but it's the same. It's like it's just because I did it because I don't know, I did it. Like, and you're like, wait, hold on, think about it though. Like, why? What? It's a waste of time.
And I will say that I'm sure that a lot, like, parts of his stories are either not true or, you know, kind of altered based on the way that he saw things. But there are several times that I have asked the same question repeatedly. I've even written it down a few times on like their messaging system, and he answers consistently the same way. So there are parts of his story that I tend to believe are more truthful than others, because, you know, he doesn't, none of the elements in the story change. Like nothing starts to get altered, which, when people kind of make up stories to fit a narrative, they start to change the more you ask about it, the more you try to pick pieces out of that story.
Yeah.
And his was very consistent for the most part. Like I said, there was a couple pieces in there that weren't, and I brought those up while we were talking. And I will also say the thing and we didn't go over his arrest a whole lot because you only get so long that you can talk to somebody at one time. But the news article says that Harley was arrested and then Asa was arrested later, but he says they were arrested together. So that is one big part of the story that doesn't really seem to make sense. But I don't know.
I wonder what Asa thinks about what he would have done with a gun scenario.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he didn't know. And I did talk to Harley and I was like, because really Asa wasn't involved in the killings,
Right.
and so he was on the outskirts of everything anyway. And so I'm like, well, do you have any feelings about him?
Right.
And he simply looked at me and he said, well, he's out. And it was the tone change that I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because again, it is also prison code that you don't talk. So the fact that he did talk was like a big ding. And that's why Harley said that he took the deal, because he's like,
I was screwed.
Yeah, he was screwed anyway, so he would have gotten more time. And I think the death penalty might have been on the table, and the plea deal prevented that.
Yeah.
Which, here in Oregon, it's on a moratorium anyway. And most of the people that are on death row have been commuted. And for a long time, I don't know if they're back at OSP, but they actually had disbanded the death row. So even though they were death row inmates, they were in like medium security prisons for a while during COVID, which I thought was insanity. The fact that they would just move them. And I was like, wait a minute. Like they're no longer in our maximums. They're in a lower level prison, but they're on death row.
To me, this is going to sound so cold-hearted, but makes more sense. They're more feel like they're more likely to get injured or killed in a lower, maximum. Aren't you protected a little bit in death row?
In death row specifically. So on death row, when I was there, they did the things that death row inmates, I think this is pretty standard across the board for how they move. They have to be shackled when they're moved. It's 2 guards. You never move more than 1 death row inmate at a time, so they can't communicate, anything like that. So you're a lot more isolated. When you go to work out here at this one, they have the guys gently call them dog pens for humans, which they are. It's 4 walls that's all chained off, and they get put in, and there's like a piece of equipment in there. And so they can work out in there. And then they have to switch if they want to go somewhere else. And I don't know the switching, how they do it, if they're like, well, you can use that tomorrow, or how that works for that, because that wasn't my realm. That's not why I was there, right?
You weren't the trainer.
No, I was not there.
The prison trainer.
But yeah, so they're a lot more isolated. I do know that there's a lot of guys that would fight to get their sentences commuted and then be pissed, and they would immediately start writing. They call them kites. And it's just like a form that they fill out. You can send one to medical, dental, to the officers if you need something done. It's basically just their handwritten form for email, because they don't have email, right? So they have to write it out, hand it to somebody. We get the letter that's like, I need this. And there would be kites about complaints about the noise and all this stuff. Because in GP, it's so especially during sports seasons, if there is a sporting game on, no matter if you like sports or not, you're going to root for them, because you want the noise level to come up in the prison. So they can't hear the tattoo guns going. They can't hear the fights. They can't hear, anything else. You just hear people shouting. So anytime, like football, oh my goodness, anytime there's a touchdown, there's an interception, there's anything, everybody's screaming. Everybody's screaming.
Even if you're not facing that TV, you just hear the first yell and
everybody's clapping. And I can tell you that in at least at the state penitentiary, because it's built like Alcatraz, I feel like if you have ever seen Alcatraz, you've seen this prison. They're really tall tiers. There's cells on one side and then glass on the other. So it's not too the cells don't face each other. There's only
Uh-huh.
one side. But on the other side of the wall, there'll be another set and then another set of glass. So you don't see the guys.
Right.
But I think it's like 5 or 7 stories of this.
Holy
And it's
cow.
like, you know, like, I don't know how long, because again, I don't remember. I think I've only been in the tiers a handful of times, but maybe 20 cells long, maybe a little bit longer. They look long. The blocks look long. I could actually find out
Yeah.
the actual, I could ask somebody, honestly. And everything but the bottom row are like double man cells. So everybody's got a bunkie.
Oh my God.
They call it a celly, but here, everywhere else, it's a bunkie. And so it gets the noise level, like, I mean, and it just vibrates and it just echoes and it is,
It makes the building come alive, I'm sure. Yeah.
And you can get away with a lot because that's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's only usually one officer walking up and down at certain intervals. So it's a lot of stuff gets concealed that way.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah. So, death row inmates still have to go outside the yard too. And then they're now surrounded by a bunch of dudes. And if it's like, so think about, we have one death row inmate that chopped up his family. Well, that included kids. So he's not very well liked.
I would imagine not.
Yeah. The other ones, there was the father-son duo that did I think it's the Woodburn bombing, but Woodburn Mall bombing. They were there. I don't believe they were well liked.
I don't think I've heard of that story either. But
we will talk about it at some point. Yeah. A lot of stuff happened here in Oregon. I have standards, I promise. That might be outside my standards.
Yeah. I feel like, I don't know the stats on this, but I feel like you're probably more likely to die in prison though, off death row, like not being a
off death row for sure, 100%.
So that's why I'm saying, like, just makes more sense. Put them out, and then we don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I mean, if we're gonna pay for it, and you know, the whole,
yeah,
that's not what we do here in Oregon, and
no, not right now. Maybe the next governor.
Yeah,
we'll see. All right, well, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.